speaker is Dr. Randall Mauldin, our featured veteran speaker, and we thank Dr. Mauldin for his service.
Thank you.
Dr. Mauldin is president and founder of Quinn Solutions, LLC, a management consultation firm involved in teaching procurement professionals to achieve the highest standard in the field with military precision, where failure is not an option. In the U.S. Marine Corps, he has provided executive guidance and strategic direction in operations, supply chain management, program management, and logistics. Randy runs the CPSM boot camps across the country, and he guarantees results. Randy will share his intriguing military case study on how Marines remain successful in combat, even when technology failed. You will learn why training and developing your team is essential for success in the global economy, especially within multinational supply chain. Please welcome Dr. Mauldin.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. How are we doing? All right, we got this thing in the Marine Corps called hoorah! Hoorah! All right, so what I want, I'm going to honor you today, and you're going to become a Marine for about the next hour, because I want you to say hoorah! So on the count of three, let me hear it. 1, 2, 3. Hoorah! There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Military enthusiasm and focus, the ability to get a team focused on a mission to get the job done. And when you talk about diversity, you're talking about bringing a lot of people together from many different cultures, genders, countries, all these different things, and say, guys, we got to get a job done. How do you get them focused? And that's what the military does. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. But before we go there, what I'd like to share with you is a story, my favorite story of all, called The Ice Maker. I was in Kenya. Is Derek still in the room? He must have left. I was in Kenya on deployment in 2007. And for those of us, who's been to Kenya? Who's been to Kenya? It is hot. It is hot. I've never been so hot as I had been in Kenya. And when it's hot, ice is a good thing. Now, I was with a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and we were doing work off the east coast of Africa, working with different things going on there while everyone else was up in the Gulf region up there. And while we were on operation, one of the things that was requested was an ice maker. An ice maker. Pretty simple, right? We're going to get some ice. We're in the hot. We need ice. So we're in camp in Kenya, and we're down around for a few days, and the S4, who's the logistics officer for the entire MU, comes by one day, and I say, yeah, hey, John, you know, we asked for an ice maker. Where is it? And he kind of goes, you see that deep freezer over there? I said, yeah. You see that guy sitting next to the deep freezer over there? I said, yeah. That's our ice maker. So what do you mean? I said, well, he makes ice for us. He fills plastic bags full of water. He puts them in the deep freezer. Once they freeze, he takes them out of the deep freezer and puts it in the bucket, refills the bags, put them back in the deep freezer. Therefore, we have ice. Absolutely, we have ice. And the reason I bring that story up for two reasons specifically. One, make sure people know, you know what the requirement really is. We say ice maker, what is that really? We were thinking one of those industrial restaurant ice makers that runs and does all that stuff. So they said ice maker, and they got an ice maker. Somebody, a person who makes ice. The other point with that story is the ingenuity of people. The mission didn't fail. We had an ice maker. It wasn't what we thought an ice maker was, but it was an ice maker that produced the result we wanted, and that's through the ingenuity of people. And what we'll talk about today is through my dissertation, which I finished going on ship overseas, was that it was people that made it all happen. When information technology failed, when planning went out the window, people stepped up and they got the job done. Now, a little bit about me. I joined the Marine Corps in 1989, and from here you can see me and my brother in Okinawa, right over here in Okinawa. We were both in the Marine Corps. He got out. I stayed in for 20 years. And then I was with, in Santiago, Chile, as an embassy guard, guarding our embassies overseas, and that's where I met Colin Powell. Looks like he and I are great friends, which lasted about 30 seconds. Smile. got my picture. Said, okay, move along, Sergeant. I said, yes, sir, I'm right here. But I had a picture with him. But he's one of what I would call my passive mentors. Somebody I don't know personally, but somebody I admire and have always read his books and felt he was somebody to follow because he was focused on the right things. He was focused on the right things. If anybody read his biography, he was brought up in a time in the military where diversity was an issue, was a challenge for people. And he said something very interesting when somebody said, well, how do you feel about, racism in the military? He just calmly says, that's their problem. That's not my problem. That's their problem. And he focused on the right things to get the things done, which made him and made him ultimately Secretary of State, which, when he served with our last president, our current president. While there as an enlisted Marine embassy duty, I applied for an officer program, was accepted, then went to the University of Florida where I met my wife, beautiful wife there, and then I became a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps and commanded a platoon of AAV vehicles, amphibious assault vehicles. Those are those vehicles, when you see the Marine Corps commercials, they come up out of the beach. Those Marines come out. Well, I commanded those vehicles, 12 of them, up there, which took me on my first MU, which is, you see me here enjoying a cigar, in Croatia. And then we started to have babies. And this is where me, right before my last deployment, with my kids, and me on ship on a helicopter getting ready to go somewhere else. And what's interesting about this particular photo with me on a helicopter is I was on a ship. I had somebody in Kenya, somebody in Kuwait, somebody in the States, somebody in Sigonella. So as a procurement leader, as a supply leader, I had people all over the world, and we were able to function effectively to meet the needs of the mission and get it done. How do you do that? And that's what we're going to talk more about today as well. And the last picture here is with me and my family. Is anybody curious about Jack Quinn Solutions, who that guy is? Anybody? Well, I'll share with you who Jack Quinn Solutions is. Jack is the middle name of that little guy right there. Quinn is the middle name of that little guy right there. And this beautiful young lady here, her middle name is Sophia, so you have JQS, Jack Quinn Solutions. And who thought of that? That beautiful woman right there. That's right. Beautiful woman right there. She thought of that because I had a whole crazy name that I couldn't even pronounce. But she came up with that. It's like, Jack Quinn Solutions. I was, all right, that's good. So if you go, I wrote these books. It's our dissertation, my dissertation. You can also find supply chain analysis, how to use supply chain analysis for your company. And I also wrote the book, How to Pass the CPSM exams, so people know the strategies we use in our courses so they can actually apply those strategies on their own if they can't make it to our courses. So we want to make sure they have that information. If you'd like a copy of this material, just go to supplychainteamtraining.com. I'll bring it up again at the end. So supplychainteamtraining.com. If you don't get a chance to write it down, just let me know. I'll let you know later in the break or this evening at the networking event. And you get a copy of this book free, along with a copy of the other books as well, and a few other bonuses out there as well. Because I want to make sure this is a valuable time for us, and that you not only get valuable for the hour we're going to spend together, but value beyond this so that you can continue to grow and develop your supply chain and your procurement team. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Hoorah! 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 Oh, come on. Hoorah. I know I'm right before lunch. I am between you and lunch, which makes me a target, right? So to work together, we're going to go back with enthusiasm. So let me hear it again. Hoorah! Hoorah! There we go. All right, good to go. Let's get started. So this dissertation, what I did during Operation Iraqi Freedom, I just left the fleet, so I left the operational forces, and I went to a base unit. And while I was there, I was working on my master's and continued to work on my doctorate. And so my Marines, my brother Marines, went out and they served in this operation. And I was in the back. It's like, well, how can I continue to contribute and do something? And the only way I could do that was to study and learn what they did, lessons learned, and bring that together in this study. And so what I did is I interviewed officers from the Foxhole all the way to CONUS and asked them what were they doing during Operation Iraqi Freedom. How did they manage their supply chain? And what was really interesting is that they planned for failure and succeeded anyway. They planned for failure and succeeded anyway because of planning, leadership, and training, which was common to everyone, that they were able to quickly assess what was going on and quickly move forward to achieve the mission. Okay. All right. Operation Iraqi Freedom lasted about 20 days. It started March 19th, 2003. President Bush declared victory on May 1st, 2003, so less than 40 days of the operation, actually invasion of Iraq. The actual invasion took less than 20 days. All that was possible due to planning and pre-positioning and getting things done. When we do maneuver warfare, it's moving faster than the opposition. When we're in business and we're competing, we have to make decisions faster than the competition. So for those of us wondering, how does this work? It's military. It's like, man, you know, don't really understand how this works with business, because in the military we're trying to move faster than the opposition. In business, you're trying to move faster than the competition. Have better ideas, be faster to market before they get there, so that you can be there for your customers before they get there for your customers. And when something changes, you want to change faster than your opposition, so that your customers know that you are the leading edge, not your competition. Logistics planning was very slow. The speed of movement was faster than the planning. And they had integration problems between operations systems, systems managing the operations, and the logistics systems managing logistics. They were poorly integrated. They were poorly integrated, meaning they were on two separate systems and they weren't communicating together. Despite this, there was success. They moved 1.2 million tons of materials with 2,000 trucks driving over 8,000 miles a day to make it happen. How? Fundamentals. Supply chain management is the block and tackle of business. The fundamentals. As a football team, you will never score a touchdown if your line cannot block and your line cannot tackle. Your quarterback can't throw a pass unless the line blocks. Your team can't stop the other team from scoring unless they tackle. So you have to master the fundamentals, and that's where we are in the business world and supply chain management. We are the block and tackle of business. Without you doing your job well, better than the competition, your company will not be as profitable, or worse yet, fail altogether, because you're not able to manage your expenses, and your expenses exceed your revenue, and then we're in trouble. You, in this room, are the heart of that capability for any business. A lot of times we'll talk about revenue, but revenue pays the bills, but profitability keeps your shareholders happy. So that's what it is, fundamentals, fundamentals. Came down to planning. You can imagine moving ships, helicopters, LCACs, hovercraft, trucks, setting up camps, all of this happening in a diverse group. There is not a more diverse group in the world than the U.S. military. And we all work together. We represent the United States of America, which is everyone here. It's an all-volunteer force, all volunteers. Nobody's made to join our armed services. And just out of curiosity, how many Marines we got in the room? Army, Navy, Air Force, all right, and Coast Guard. Coast Guard, the unsung heroes of the United States. Why? Because they're the ones out there doing the drug programs. They're the ones, when the hurricanes are coming towards us, we're driving that way. Where are they going? The other way, right out there. And they're making all this happen. It's a diverse group making it happen. People made the difference because they had good planning, metrics that made sense, and information technology. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot of the problems that they had with these three areas. And the point, even though we identify the problems and we learn from those problems, what we want to do is learn what we can do better next time, how to avoid those problems, to do that. And it's all about people. The one picture I have up here, those Marines, these three Marines, the man in the middle, Staff Sergeant Scott Dickinson, was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. And I always bring his picture up and I memorialize him so we don't forget him as a Marine. And he was a young man that worked with me. We brought him up from a young Marine all the way up to an NCO and beyond. And the way we did that was through training, leadership, and growing him up, giving him the capabilities. We talked about diversity this morning. Getting things done. How do we get that? You have a diverse group of people. How do you get them to get things done? It's through training and leadership. Training and leadership. All right. First thing I'd like to talk about is planning. When they were planning this operation, what they did was one group was the lead group. That was our West Coast Marine Corps, 1st Marine Corps Division. The second group, or the second Marine, or second MEF, was the supporting group. So they all flew to California and they came up with this great plan on how they were going to do the invasion. Part of that plan involved a displacement of logistics unit at a certain point in the operation. When the person who was involved in the planning on the West Coast flew back to the East Coast, he said, you know, hey, when at a certain point in the operation, we're going to do this, and we're going to displace, and we're going to move up to this point. They were there on the East Coast, and they said, you know, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something different. But that word did not get to the West Coast. So the West Coast thought they were going to do something, and then they didn't do it. Has that ever happened to you where you had planning and some people were planning and said, hey, we're going to do this, and then not follow through on that plan? A business example is working with a CPSM certification boot camp in Charlotte last year, and we had a gentleman who was with a healthcare products company. He was a supply chain. They ran a campaign for sales for a specific health product, and it was successful. They were having great sales, but then they ran out of a key component to make that healthcare product. And in our conversations, I asked him, I said, had you been involved in the planning, could you have avoided this? He said, yes, because I would have been able to anticipate the needs and put things in place so that when we were successful, we could deliver and we could make those sales. And we wouldn't be in this predicament right now where we have a possibility to make sales, but we can't deliver, so we're not making those sales. The point of this slide, in this picture, is that in regards to planning, you have what they call a CSSD, or Combat Service Support Detachment, that's on the field. They can carry up to 15,000 gallons of fuel. The planning, the units that they were supporting, required 45 to 50,000 gallons of fuel. So the fuel trucks were running back and forth on the battlefield, supporting these units whenever they were half empty or half full. That's when they needed to be there. They had to be there and fill them up before they went back so they can continue to move. The results of this, and one of the people I interviewed, they were getting ready to go into an operation, and this logistics officer was looking for fuel. He thought he requested 25,000 gallons. He was trying to confirm. He requested 25. Did you get my request? Did you get my request? Remember that thing, Combat Operations Logistics Information Systems not coordinating? He thought it was in there. But he found it wasn't there. He was looking for it. It didn't show up. They had to kick off the operation. What ended up happening is a helicopter delivered 3,500 gallons of fuel when they needed 25,000. And they had to actually refuel in the middle of a battle in order to support the operation that was going on. So a critical mistake. They were still successful. However, did it have to be that way? Could it have been better planning, more discussion, better integration of different systems to do that? Think about your business. How often is operations moving forward, doing what they're supposed to do and serve your customers, and then they tell you, oh, by the way, I need you to do this. And we're jumping through hoops, making it happen, which costs more money, causes more pain or conflict or friction, and just makes it more difficult for us to provide for our customers. And if we fail, what happens? The customer perceives something's going on with the company, and they may go to your competition. So we want to be involved in the sales planning. We want to be involved in the marketing planning, even if it's just sitting in the room listening so that we can anticipate what the needs are to do that. Okay. Volcanic ash. Something happens in Greenland every once in a while called a volcano erupting. It shuts down the supply chain going from the United States and Europe and back. How many of us have plans in place when that happens to shift somewhere else? To bring it out for the planes and put it on the ships, or do something different than what we have. The tsunami. When Japan had the tsunami and it shut down a lot of the electronics coming from Japan, was there a plan in place? What did you do to make it smoother for your customers? Did you have alternate sources of supply set up and ready to support just in case? And when we do planning, all we're doing is burning brain cells and electrons. A bunch of smart people like everyone in this room sitting around the room saying, what can we do? How can we do this? If this happens, what are we going to do? So that when it does happen, we can make it and adjust faster. And we can make it happen. So we're there. We're there. One of our sponsors, UPS, this is from 2013. This was a headline that I pulled out. You know, a surge in holiday packages due to UPS shipments. Now, UPS is very good at what they do. They plan and they say surge, you know, and it's delays, not stopping shipments, so they're reacting. But what UPS cannot control is people's perception that if I give it to you today, you have to deliver it tomorrow. They don't think they're just one of 20 million trying to deliver right now. They don't take that into account. So by knowing it's coming and it happens every year, what planning can we do to make that a smoother thing for us? And one of the things I saw this year when we were doing the Christmas shopping is UPS, USPS, all the different logistics companies sending out, get it in the mail, get it in the mail, get it in the mail. In other words, they knew the limits of what they had, but they also knew the customers needed to know better. And they needed to get it in the mail so they could have it delivered on time for Christmas to do that. The point is, planning is essential for strategic sourcing. To shift from tactical purchasing running purchase orders day in and day out. To get to strategic sourcing requires planning. Planning with forecasting and benchmarking, it lets you be strategic because you know where you need to go and you can be strategic in your planning. So it's absolutely essential for strategic sourcing. Hoorah? Hoorah. Well, you still with me? All right, good, good. Next thing is metrics. What do we measure? When do we measure? How do we measure? It's all about measurement because that allows us to know what's going on in the supply chain. During the operation, they had 3 metrics they were trying to track, or they were tracking. One was order ship time, the other was fill rate, and the other was readiness. Order ship time was 2 to 5 weeks, fill rate was about 10%, and readiness was at 95%. So if you look at these 3 metrics, you're like, wow, I don't know how they could be ready if they were having such horrible ship time and fill rate. The reason they were ready is because they planned for failure. They knew the supply chain was going to fail, so they brought it all with them. They knew what they had to do. And what was really interesting is that when we started talking about fill rates, is that people were delivering stuff and they started trading. Remember the TV series MASH and how, you know, Radar always traded a case of scotch for this thing and for that other thing? Well, that's what started happening. They started trading. I've got this, you got that, I need what you have, you need what I have, let's trade. And so they started trading. And the other thing, to put this in context, is looking at the supply chain and the way they use the systems. They were using a system that was based on COBOL programming language. Is anybody familiar with that? Yeah, 30 plus, 40 year programming language now. And the way they did it is a unit at the foxhole level would put a requisition on a 3x5 disk. Remember those? They would hand transport it up to the support unit who would load it into their computer, do what they had to do with it, and then they would put together their disk and then take it to the next level back. And then take it to the next level back, up to the point to where the one unit that had the sat phone to shoot it where it needed to go to get filled finally received it. So you can imagine disks breaking or getting one grain of sand on a 3x5 disk just ruins it, makes it not good. And what was happening is a person would put an order in today, the next day they would go to get status on their order. There would not be status because it hadn't made us all the way back. So without status, what do you think they did next? Reordered, right? It's like, if you don't have it in the system, it must not be in the system, let me order again. And so then it would continue, and then it would continue. And to the point to where it finally got to DLA in the States, DLA said, okay, they don't know what's an order, a reorder, or the other order, they just fill it all. So they ended up putting everything in containers, and they would ship those containers overseas. And the containers would show up, and they would not know what was in the containers or which orders were for the stuff in the containers. So those containers would then sit on the dock, and they would continue to build that stockpiling of stuff there. Okay. But no matter what, they always made the mission happen. Over, under, through, whatever it takes. People were focused on supporting those Marines the way our teams need to be focused on doing what we need to do to support our customers to give them what they need for our businesses to do that. They had misaligned metrics as a result, huge backlog of supplies, wasteful funds on containers. Containers would show up, they wouldn't know what to do with them, so they put them aside, and when a container sits on the side, we're getting charged demurrage, which is constant and consistent, all thrown there. And when a Marine sees a container in the field, what does he think of it? He thinks that's his new home. Like, I'm going to live in this thing. Empty it out, I got a new home. So they would keep that those containers there. $1.2 billion in discrepancies. Stockpiling of excess supplies with zero documentation. I went to Albany, Georgia in 2007 for my final tour before I retired. And there was this lot in the back that had this line of Connex boxes, of railroad containers. And we were going through a tour of the base, and the guy said, you see that line of containers out there? I said, yeah, what's going on with that? I said, well, those are containers we have no idea what's inside them. So what they would do is they'd bring them inside the warehouse, they would empty them all out, they'd inventory them, and then they would process them, and then that would be an empty container they could finally return, and then they would go in and they'd bring the next one in. So huge stockpiling of excess supplies that weren't needed. And what was really interesting is they were going around the supply system. It's like, I expected to fail. Some people brought their own satellite phones so they could make their own phone calls to the States. It's outside the system. Again, people being ingenious and focused on the mission, making it happen. And multiple duplicate requests, which I mentioned before. The point is, supply chain management is putting the right stuff in the right place, the right time, and the right quantity. The metrics tell us what's going on, so we know what's happening, and without them, we have uncertainty. When we have uncertainty, people get scared, and when there's fear, they stockpile stuff to serve the needs of the mission. Is anybody experiencing that? You have people stockpiling stuff? Okay. We're doing that. So think about that. Then information technology. Really interesting. At this particular point, the United States Marine Corps was using 2 different systems, 2 different parts of the organization. One was on the old system, the 30-year-old COBOL planning system that was at disk. The new one was what they called Atlas, was server-based, web-based. And they had half the Marine Corps on the server web-based and the other half on this old system. So there came a point when they were planning, they had to make a decision. Which system are we going with? They made a decision to go back to the old system because there were more people familiar with it. So they went back to the old system. The point is, it's a waste of time, money, and effort in developing a system that ended up being useless. When we deploy software, we want to do it deliberately and efficiently so you don't have half the organization on one system and the other half of the organization on something totally different. Is there real-world examples of this kind of stuff going on? BMW, going through that, feeling supply chain frustrations because they were going a change in supply chain systems, doing that. So is it real? Is it possible that having too many systems going on and working, that it can cause confusion and cause uncertainty in the organization? Does that make sense? Are we going to do that? Okay. All right. The point is, technology is a tool, it's not a solution. A lot of times, doing our research for marketing and trying to position training for different companies, CEOs, executives feel software is the solution for the supply chain. So we'll invest in these huge ERP systems that cost millions and millions of dollars. And it's not so much the money as the time and change that happens to your organization that causes the friction and causes things to become, just don't know what's going on. How many of us have information systems that are great, look great on paper, but don't actually work? In other words, they weren't made for supply chain. They were made for an accountant. And they just added a supply chain function on top of it to do that. So technology is a tool, not a solution. And we want to know how to use the technology. But then when technology fails, we want to make sure people have what they need to be successful. They have what they need to be successful. Why were they successful? Leadership. They had people on the ground that were willing to make a decision based on an understanding of the mission and what needed to be accomplished. What needed to be accomplished. Ingenuity. People being creative in their thinking. Not just accepting, well, it's ordered, I haven't gotten it yet. What are we going to do? No, you're going to do something. I don't know what, but do something. And what they would do is they would have these lieutenants with a lance corporal get in a vehicle, and they say, drive that way. I know there's a unit over there. Go see what they have. And they get on this vehicle, and just one and one, they would go and they drive halfway across the battlefield to find stuff, to be there, to find a solution somewhere. Find a solution somewhere. A focus. Having a clear, defined mission. Working with many different teams over 20 years and plus, when it ever came down to getting the focus of the mission, focused on a mission to get the team focused together in doing what they need to do for your company. So you look at building these diverse workforces, bringing in different cultures, different ethnicities, different genders, bringing them all together. It's like, how do I get them to work together? Is through focused mission. What is your mission? Supply chain, strategic sourcing, supply leader. What is your mission in regards to the larger team? And when you go through CPSM certification training, we talk about the planning, the fundamentals that you need to be thinking about when you're doing this planning. And getting everyone focused on the right things. Because it is no good to have a corporate mission up here and strategic sourcing. It's like, that's our corporate mission. Our mission is to support that mission. Now what are we going to do to make that happen? Getting everyone focused on doing that. And finally, training. Bringing everyone together with a common foundation of knowledge. The Marine Corps, the Army, Air Force, the Navy, we all use the same language when it comes to logistics and supply chain language. We all go through similar schools based on the same doctrine, so that we understand. When I say tomato, you understand what tomato is. And when I say potato, you understand what potato is. You understand exactly what I'm talking about. So that when a Marine and a sailor get together to do planning, we quickly understand each other and we move forward. It doesn't take time to understand, well, when you say vendor managed inventory, is that the same thing as supply managed inventory? Is that the same thing? It's like, yes, it is. Okay, well, now I understand. You don't have that friction, that uncertainty in the discussion. So training is absolutely key. And the CPSM certification is a great way to establish that foundation for your organization. Whatever it may be a CPSM or any other certification out there, having a solid common foundation for your entire team is important. And when I mention team, I'm not just talking about your procurement team that works in your office. Think about your vendors and your suppliers as part of your team as well. Because when they have supply chain problems, you have supply chain problems. If they can't get something delivered, you're not going to get what you need or what you ordered. I was at a conference last year in Miami, had someone at the conference, he was delivered stuff to the Caribbean in doing that. And one of the things he was delivering was soda ash. And his story was that there was a shortage of soda ash. His vendor had soda ash, but they didn't have any for him. He said, you know, we have it. I've got my better customers. That's who we're going to get the first, and then we'll come back to you later in doing that. In other words, that vendor's supply chain problems turned out to be his supply chain problem. So when you think about your vendors, teaching them these skills, these fundamentals, asking them, how do you manage your supply chain so that your supply chain problems don't become my supply chain problems? Are they doing the best practices that we teach during the CPSM certification? Are we doing the things that are common to success? Continuous improvement, managing inventory. Are we doing those things? Do you, as a buyer, have a right to ask those questions? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can work with a sales guy. Talk to the CEO of that company. Say, what are you doing? Are you getting your buyers involved in stuff like this? So I know you have a solid supply chain. So I have absolutely no doubt in that, in doing that. Okay. Any questions? What's for lunch? Questions? Anything? Yes?
This is great. Now, what about the companies? There are a lot of large corporations that have very legacy-type infrastructures, and what we always hear is change creates a lot of problem. You know, they have their processes, and the people too. They're very comfortable because change means that they got to learn something new. How do you, what is your recommendation for companies that do that? Because ultimately it impacts those of us that are nimble, that have the technology, that have the vision of what needs to be done, but you're forced to continue to operate the way they've always operated.
So yeah, so just to rephrase the question, you have a company that's wanting to change, but you're getting that pushback from the team saying, you know, why are we doing this? The military does many different types of operations. And they can do a humanitarian assistance. They could end up going in to rebuild a bridge or rebuild a school. One of the reasons we were in Kenya at the time of the first picture, they were rebuilding a school in that area. You could actually have a full-on operation to do that. What allows the military to function in no matter what the situation is a mission and a process, a planning process that allows them to go through and ask the right questions. Challenging assumptions, having assumptions. So when you have a new change, a new system that you may want to use, is getting everyone together to get a common mission and focus first. If you understand what you're going to change, why you're going to change it, then the how becomes very easy. Because you know what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and then the how becomes very easy. Does that make sense? Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
I've been fortunate to place ex-nuclear submarine leader into a head of supply chain role. And I thought there was just one observation, you know, I talked to him about stress. That's a whole different discussion. But what was really interesting was, you know, when I asked him about what made them successful and what actually the elements of stress and how they take stress out of it. And it was training. Because you just train and you train and you train.
Right.
So how do you apply that within a business perspective when, you know, I've come through the corporate route and we do training, and then we do the work.
Right.
How do you continue to have the effort on training like you would within the military?
Well, So how do we continue to have the effort on training and actually make the training successful in the company? Not just, I've got time, I've got money, let me go do some training.
Like a one-off, how do we move it from a one-off exercise to something that we can just continue to have within the organization?
Right.
What would be your...
My thoughts, using the military, is there was always a focus on mission. And when the military goes into battle, it's because politicians have decided that's what we're going to do. But the reason we fight is for each other. And when it comes to a company and doing team building, leadership training, or even supply chain training, it's like, why does the sales guy want the supply chain guy to be successful? Because, one, he can deliver to the customer, but if you're both successful, the company's profitable, which would increase bonus, which would also increase ability to longevity of sustainability in the company. So having focus for the company. So that top level leadership is absolutely paramount with their vision. Okay, I'm going to send you this training, and this is what the results I expect from you once you have this training to do that. So in a strategic plan, 3 to 5 years out, you know the training you do this year is going to help you get the thing done you're going to do in year 3 or year 4. But if you wait till year 3 or year 4 to do that training, you're already behind because you don't know what it takes to accomplish that mission. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. What other questions? Yes, sir.
So if you think of each of the service units as kind of a separate business unit of an organization, kind of drawing that analogy, so what kind of strategies do you use to get the separate business units to work together, from a supply chain perspective?
One, common technology or common terminology, so we're all speaking the same language. That's paramount. 2, there's a system behind that called DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, that also supports all the services, all the different services. So everyone has their own individual supply chain for them specifically, and then once it gets beyond their capabilities, they all fall into DLA or they go directly to the vendor to do that. But there's a process for that. In other words, it's well known. It's like, okay, if I don't have what I need, what do I do? It's not a guess. They know exactly what they're going to do. So there's a well-rehearsed process that makes it fast and efficient. It's not a guesswork. It's not like, well, I'm out. One of the things I found from the study, the Army and the Marine Corps use very common material. So the Marine Corps needed something. They would have to order it all the way back from the States. If they just walked across the street and asked the Army, do you have this, they would have had it. And they could have given it to them. So they could have saved a lot, 3 weeks to 3 hours by doing that. And then having that common visibility, which was one of the things they learned from this, was to come up with these systems where they have visibility throughout the supply chain. They know the Army has stuff. Let's go find out what they had. Now the smarter Marines knew that, and they would ask those questions. They knew the systems. They had access to those systems. Again, they prepared for failure. They said, well, my supply chain doesn't meet my needs. Where can I go to get it? The Army's right there. Let me figure out how to work with the Army. And they did that. Does that make sense? What other questions? Yes, sir. Oh, go ahead.
How much of what you did there on the field did you have to do to circumvent the problems with FAR, the federal procurement rules and all that? That it was just too onerous to go through the proper methods, and despite those systems being designed to have a proper, equitable, efficient, ultimately outcome, in the field it becomes too slow, so you just can't do it that way.
So a couple things. One, they knew the regulations. 2, what they did, they started what they call cannibalization. Cannibalization is I have 5 vehicles, 4 are broke. 1 vehicle, I'll take every part I need to fix those other 4 vehicles and get them up and running. Now that is absolutely against the regulations. But the regulations are there to keep things running smoothing, and then when things are no longer in those ideal conditions, we have to change, we have to adjust. And they knew the rules they were breaking. They documented the rules they were breaking, so whenever asked, they could say, why did you do that? This is why I did it. Many of us have policies in place. Those policies were once written because of a specific situation. And based on that situation, that's when we apply the policy. But then situations change. Time changes. Those policies may not even apply. So we look at the policies to get the guidance, but then if we ask ourselves, is this guidance still applicable? If not, we need to change. And that's where we as supply leaders have started to change. We're no longer robots sitting there processing purchase orders. We're thinking strategically. We're thinking 3 to 5 years out. What does it take for me to help my company be in business 5 years from now? So we'll challenge those things. Those folks that are focused on being technical procurement people that just follow the processes and the policies, Randy's opinion, your lifetime is limited. It's just a matter of time before companies start to say, I want a supply leader, not a procurement technician. I can outsource that. I need somebody that can think. I need somebody that can think. Yes, ma'am.
Along the same lines as that gentleman discussed, so sustainability in your supply chain, right? What are we doing? Because a lot of it is reverse logistics and all those other things. And I remember going to some port, I forget which one it was, but it was miles and miles of Humvees and Jeeps and things that are all coming back that are not repairable or that have, I guess, reached their end of life cycle. And obviously your vendors or suppliers don't want to take them back, right? Because they want to sell you new ones. So, like, what is the military's aspect, or what are they doing around sustainability?
So how do we keep the systems continuously running so we don't have to buy a whole new set every 20 years to do that? Is that something like, how do I keep, those things are all broken, how do I make them work again or without spending all the money to do that? There is an operation set up in Albany, Georgia, not just Albany, but many different what they call depots where they go in to do that next level of repair. And these vehicles come in and these contractors work on them to bring them up to speed. And some they'll throw out, but when the ones they throw out, they take those parts from them and they make these other vehicles whole again. And they keep working them and working them. And it was cheaper to rebuild them than to buy brand new ones to do that. Does that make sense? So the strategy was to rebuild as much as they could. What other questions? Yes, sir.
This is something of a follow-on question. What do you see as the right level of centralization for supply management in the federal government? So you talked about the Department of Defense, and you listed the Army, Navy, Marines, and we have the GSA, then we have the Veterans Administration, Homeland Security, and they're all broken down. Should we have a CPO for all federal spending, or for the DOD, or for the Army, and how do you see that working? Is that so big that it's unmanageable at a central level, or how would you deploy it, given your experience?
So to rephrase the question is, how centralized should the government be in regards to purchasing to do that? And I would offer that the centralization should go as far as not to affect responsiveness and flexibility. One of the reasons the federal government is so tied down in the procurement process is because they have so many regulations. It's like, we have to do this, we have to do that. And Randy's opinion is people don't exercise those processes well enough to make them efficient. They always complain about them and then they go around them. And for those of us that have been through the federal acquisition regulations and look how they develop products and they do buys, it makes sense. But it's slow because people don't rehearse it and they don't bring the right tools to the table to make it efficient and fast and effective to do that. So what level of centralization would be to the point of affecting responsiveness to the needs of the customer, and then that's defined by the customer. Because I know there's processes in place to do what they call urgent needs, so I can buy something within 24 hours if I can justify it, as well as if I can't justify it, I have to wait for the process. And the process can take anywhere from 3 weeks, 30 days, to 6 months, 6 years, depending upon what we're trying to purchase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to a certain point.
Okay.
Just wondering how you separate the policy setting and the process determination versus the execution.
That's a challenging question, because there's the people part, in that you can write a policy and then you hand it to the people, and then the people do what? Thank you very much. And they put it in the drawer and they go back to doing whatever they were doing before. So you can write an awesome policy, but is it enforceable? Do you have the change at the level where you have the execution level? Will they follow that policy? And how do you motivate them to have that policy to do that? And the federal government has a culture of just waiting. It's like, okay, well, somebody else will do that. Or, you have a few talented people that will take hold of that and really drive it. But then when you get in the bigger bureaucracy of it all, it is a bureaucracy. It is a bureaucracy. And if we think, well, it's a government, they're a bureaucratic organization, think about your larger corporations and how bureaucratic those are as well, to see the common elements between the two organizations.
Yeah, they're very similar. You've seen the pendulum swing from centralized to decentralized. Now I think we're probably in a center-led mode.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that, yeah.
Something similar in the government, not center-led DOD.
Right. So just off the cuff thinking, if you think about where we are today versus where we were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were very focused on the operators in the field. So it's very flexible, very responsive, whatever it takes to make it happen. Today, we're going to draw down. We're trying to get better control of things. So that's where the policies are becoming more enforced to do that. So there's two different times of what the customer requires. So if we focus on the customer, what their needs are, then we're able to say more focused on what we need to do in regards to centralization versus decentralization. Kind of like most companies have a purchase card program. Limit up to $2,500, and we were talking to somebody last week, and he said, yeah, I had a $2 million limit. I was like, seriously? He said, yeah, and he was great. He ordered a Russian jet to deliver something off a purchase card, and we were all just amazed at that story to do that. It's like, wow. But flexibility was there, and he had the flexibility. The policy was in place to allow him to be flexible to do that. Any other questions? How are we doing on time? Oh, we're good. We're good. All right. Well, did you find this valuable? Find this valuable? Is there? Very good. As I mentioned before, just go to this URL. It'll take you to another page where you can put in your information and get all this free copy of the book, as well as some other free gifts I have for you to go there and enjoy. And I would love to hear from you about these products, just to say, what your thoughts are, and love to connect with you on LinkedIn as well. That's one of the main places I like to connect with people because it's a professional network, and we can have open discussions with the rest of us professionals in our area and stay connected that way. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you.